can modify it in various ways. For your really young kids, you can describe it in pictures. You can even use facial expressions on what a 0 looks like versus what a 10 looks like. And I actually like to give kids examples of what 0 is. So I'll tell them, if I'm dealing with a child who's working on anxiety, what's the most calm you've ever been? Where's your super calm? Where's your 0? And one little girl actually said, she's in middle school, she said, oh, when I'm in my bathtub with candles floating all around. Perfect, that's your 0, that's your super calm. What's the most anxious you've been when you just can't handle it? That's your 10, what is that? And say, oh, it's like right before a test when I know I'm not studied enough. Okay, that's your 10. I'll say, where are you right now on the scale of 0 to 10? And they'll give you a qualifier. And it's subjective to them. It doesn't matter how we see it, it's what they feel. And we talk about, okay, when you're at this level, what kinds of things do you feel? What do you see? What do you hear? What are you doing when you're a 5 versus a 10? And then talking about what can you do to bring them down from that 10 to a 0. Very simple to use, correct? If you look at the websites that are referred to on the bottom, there are lots of different ways where you can, they have samples of different ones that you can use. Some use just a basic scale. In our book today that you printed out, there's actually a scale that goes from left to right, 0 to 10. Some kids, depending on the child, they want it to be vertical, 0 on the bottom, 10 on the top. So you can cater it to that child's specific needs. Some kids need the facial expressions. With my really low functioning kids, even though they're in middle school, especially when they're distressed, how functional are they? They're distressed, so they're coming into you, especially if they're coming in for a crisis moment. I like to use photographs or pictures of themselves when they're distressed. So take pictures of them. This is your distress phase, and even put a mirror up. What is my face right now? Well, you're saying you're 1, but this is what I'm seeing. But it's their subjection. Oh, okay. They see, is there a connection to what they're saying, they're feeling, and what their facial expressions show. And I haven't done this yet, but at the South, when we talked about this, we talked about using this as data collection. And here's when I talk about this a little later. What do kids remember when they have some behaviors? Typically, what is the thing that sticks in your memory? Their best day or their worst day? Their worst day, right? So when you have something like this, like a subjective myth, and you track the data, you can say, you know what? You said that you have awful days, school sucks, like the slide that you saw this morning. But how many days do you really feel a 10 versus how many days do you really feel a 0? So if you track that, you can actually give them more clear data. So you know, sometimes it feels like this is the worst day because it's right now it's really bad, but it's not always continuing. Always. Any questions? Pretty easy, right? Okay, pass it off to Vera with the incredible 5 points.
Okay. So just like Cindy was saying, you guys, if you didn't print the handouts, one of these handouts should be in the emails that you receive for you to print, and it's the incredible 5-point scale. I actually just got to know the 5-point scale, or the incredible 5-point scale, about a year ago. And one of the other school psychologists within the district introduced me to the incredible 5-point scale, and now I use this quite a bit. How many of you guys are familiar with it? Okay, great. So a lot of you guys already know about it. How many of you guys actually use it? So some of you, great. Some ideas, what have you guys used it for?
I've used it for kids with anxiety, or with explosive behaviors, but they haven't accompanied what when my worries get too big.
Okay.
With it, that my manual can help the child start understanding what a 5 is or what a 1 is, which is broad.
Okay, so when my worries get too big, to kind of accompany that. There's a ton of resources nowadays for the incredible 5-point scale that you can find. I included a lot of different information here for you guys. One of the new things that I just found that I have not yet used, but I went into the website, I did some research on it, and it's an app. So there's an app to develop your own 5-point scale for some of those kids that have their iPads already, or maybe they have some kind of communication device already that they use. This may be the way to do it rather than doing it in paper, kind of like what I'm going to show you in a little bit. This is the book, one of the books. There are so many different things now, but this is one of them. It's called the Incredible 5-Point Scale. And this is pretty much the extent of the scale. Can everybody see this? So it goes from 1 to 5, And it starts very basic, and you can actually modify it just to fit whatever needs you have for that specific student. If you have a child, for example, that requires the pictures, you may want to include the pictures. But for some kids, I have used this with high school students. So obviously I don't include the pictures with those kids. And some of the students that are able to read, there's a lot more words in terms of what it is that they need to do. And you can actually add as many columns as you think you need. So I'll give you a quick little example. Okay, so I just put this one together for a little kindergartner. Can you guys see it? I know it's kind of small, but it kind of gives you the idea. Oh, by the way, if you guys are interested in getting the template, I'm happy to share it. I looked everywhere to kind of get a template, and there's a lot of pictures here and on the internet that you can definitely use, but you definitely have to kind of put it together yourself. So if you're interested, I'm happy to email it to you guys. So what I've done is I've included 4 different columns here, again with the same scale, the 1 through 5 scale. For this kid, because he is a kindergartner and he responds very well to the facial expressions, we definitely included that. So this is things that I can do when I'm anxious. And so we start with level 1. What do we look like when we are at level 1? What does that mean? So what does it feel like? It's one of the columns. And so we talk about what does that feel like to be at a 1? So to be at a 1, for example, my body is calm and I'm awesome. And so we included that word because that's kind of the word that he uses, and the teacher uses this language with the students. How are we doing? Are we awesome? Yeah, we're awesome. And so they do thumbs up and using the phrase awesome. So you want to include and incorporate some of the language that the students are already used to in your scale. And so you kind of continue to a level 2. What would level 2 look like? And so this is kind of the face, and this is what it feels like. The one column that I really like including here is I can try to. So I can try to do what? What are the things that I can do? So once I've identified, oh, this is what I look like, this is what it feels like, now the next one is, well, what can I do, right? So once we identify what can we do at the different levels, it's a really good tool now for us to use with the student, but also for the adults to know what to do with that student. So I'm gonna just give you a quick little example. So number 1, my body's calm and I'm awesome. So it says, what can I do? I can give a thumbs up to my teacher, right? So that's the very beginning, like I'm awesome, I'm pretty good. As you move up, so my body is not calm, so level 2, my body's not calm, but I still feel okay. So then what can I do? Then I can ask 2, and all these different strategies are things that we have already identified as things that we can do with those students that will definitely diminish some of that anxiety that the student is experiencing. So for this particular student, for example, I can read a fun book, I can color, I can play with Play-Doh. Or I can keep working with my friends and my teacher. That's still an option there because they may be feeling a little anxious, but it may just be, okay, I'm feeling a little anxious, but I think I can still work with my friends here. So you kind of get the point as it increases, you have additional strategies. One of the ladies in the group that I'm in my table, she actually indicated that at one of her schools, her teacher actually included a 4th column here, which is, what should my teachers do? I haven't included that, but I think that's a great idea. What can my teachers do? Now it's not only for the student in terms of what can I do. You know, I'm not quite sure how I feel about that yet. I mean, I like the idea. I just don't know that I like this child having that. Because I think part of using the scales is for the student to start identifying how they themselves feel, and then in turn start kind of connecting those ideas with, this is the way I feel, what should I do? Because eventually we would want the child to be able to regulate his or her own feelings, emotions, behavior at that point, right? So I like the idea of adding that column maybe for the teachers, so that the teachers can have maybe the one with the 4th column so that they can say, oh my goodness, Johnny is at a level 3. What do I do for Johnny? Let me look at his plan. Okay, level 3, this is what it says to do. So it would be more a guide for those teachers that are working with the students rather than for the student to go, hey, teacher, Miss Smith, you're not doing what the plan says you're supposed to do for me, right? So I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. I like the idea of giving the guidance to the teachers, just not sure that I would add it to that fourth column for the student to have. Obviously, you can modify this in so many different ways. One of the things that we decided to do for our little guy is that we have this for him to identify how he's feeling, but we also have his communication binder where we have every page, like a red page, with the strategies that he can use, orange page with the strategies and pictures. And so now once we identify, okay, how are you doing with this? And if he identifies already, I'm at a level 3, then we go, what should we do? What are our options? So now we just present the options to the student, and then the student can say, I want to do X activity that we have already identified. We go and we engage in the activity for the specified amount of time that we said we were going to engage in the activity, and then we are kind of done with that at that point. See how it works? Okay. The other piece, how are we doing on time, Cindy? Can you tell me how much we have? Okay. Okay, the other piece that we talked about today is the introduction of our direct treatment plan. How many of you guys like this? Yes? Good. Some of you are like, I'm not sure, I'm still kind of learning about it. Not sure what I think about it yet. Okay, I know that at least in the table that I was at, some of you guys were talking about, oh my God, this is so neat. You know, this is something that we've been talking about for a while, that, you know, we understand that there's this additional area or this additional needs that we're not necessarily addressing through a behavior intervention plan. This is a good way to do that. One piece that's included here is our goals that kind of connect to, obviously, some of the goals that maybe we can connect with the behavior intervention plan, but there's one specific goal in particular that talks about the subjective units of discomfort, right? And so this one says, okay, the student is supposed to now tell us, how do you think you're doing? So based on this intervention that we implemented, now I'm going to ask you, how do you think you are doing? And so this, as well as SUDS that Cindy just kind of presented to you guys, is a good way to kind of connect it to that goal. So you can actually use this scale, and then you can check with that goal and say, okay, Johnny, whenever it is that you guys decided that it is an important time to check. I know some of the people in our table were also discussing that, well, you know, some of the kids get very frustrated when you're asking them, how are you feeling? How many times are you asking? About 8 times a day. Well, maybe that's not something we want to do 8 times a day for that student. I'm not sure. So you guys decide how frequently to ask, but this is, again, a good way to check in with the student and say, okay, how am I doing at meeting my goal for that particular portion in my DTP? Okay, one last thing here that I wanted to point to is the actual handout that you guys have. Some of the behaviors, which I'm sure a lot of you guys seem to be familiar with the scale already, but some of the additional behaviors, voice volume, for example, obsessional index, anxiety index, meeting and greeting others, learning about control, touching scale, understanding feelings. These are just some of the behaviors that you could address through the 5-point scale or the incredible 5-point scale. The other thing is that really anybody can implement it. Once you set it up, once you train the staff, teachers can implement it, school staff, instructional assistants can implement this, and also mental health professionals can also use it as a guide as to how are we doing today. The other thing is that the authors of the incredible 5-point scale recommend that you do a one-to-one teaching session with the students to introduce the idea of the scale. So you would be meeting with them, kind of going over what it means, what 1 looks like, what it means to be out of 1, and what are the strategies. So you would be doing some one-to-one sessions with the student before you actually say, okay, we are ready now to implement it, and now we're ready to kind of use it. There's going to be some prompting that is going to be required at that point, and you guys are going to make the ones. You guys are going to be the ones making the decision as to how much prompting is required for those students at that point. And then the other great thing is that this is another tool that you guys can use for your RTI interventions, level 2s and 3s. So if we could think about, like, let's say a level 2, we could possibly use a volume scale, which is one of the things that one of the classrooms is using. So a volume scale for the whole group, just to kind of monitor how are we doing with our noise level within the classroom. So again, really good ways to incorporate this into a plan that you may already have in place. Okay, and I heard clapping, so what was that? Okay. So any questions about this? Yes? No, this actually, so the data that the authors used in the review that they included in their book includes kids as young as kindergarten, but as high as high school students. And again, you just modify it based on the age group. You know, you don't want to make it too kiddie-like for like a high school student. And again, in terms of the wording that you're using, that's going to also change. Okay?
We use it successfully with our students up to 22.
Oh,
and it's just how we modify it.
My nephew's 21, and he adjusts his scale based on what he does now, and he's autistic. He rewrites it like every quarter or every semester now for college based on how he feels for a class. So he knows how to adjust it for himself.
Perfect.
There's also the 5 is Against the Law, which is another
Yes.
book that's along the same series. So it kind of talks about some of the behaviors and more for the older kids to say whether it's, what's appropriate or inappropriate, but it's also like what is against the law. So put them in that kind of frame.
Yeah, and there's been so many scales that have been developed since the initial thought of using a scale for that purpose. So 5 is Against the Law is probably another just kind of supplemental or idea that kind of stemmed from this. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
I'm just used to preschool, just 3 numbers.
Perfect. So you've modified it a little bit. So less numbers, 3 numbers for preschoolers. Okay, good ideas. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
I've used this a lot, and I incorporate it all the time in work because I see it works, but I never read anything that showed like real evidence-based, besides that it's visual support. And so, I think the autism, reviews and visual supports are helpful, but that kind of, I never thought about it really as CBT, even though there is a educational way that you do it.
Absolutely.
And the way I use it for that component is, I'm in charge of the kids in PE program. So I say when you're at above 5 and 7, and if you're at an 8, I need you to come see me out. So they can even tell people, I'm at an 8, so it's coded. They don't have to say, I'm about to blow up. These are the behaviors I'm going to engage in. They say, I'm feeling very distressed, I'm at an 8, and they walk out to my office. So it helps them take control of the environment and things that are just setting them off too much.
There is, how many of you guys have heard of the AIMS website or the Autism Internet modules? Okay, if you're familiar with it, great. You can actually find a step-by-step module in that website. If you are not familiar with it, you can find the resource on that handout that you guys can have access to. And at the very end of that module, you will definitely have lots of research that you can look at and print directly from it. So it's a really nice way to go. It literally takes you step by step as to how to develop the scale and how to implement it, and also where to find that research that you're looking for. Okay?
Thank you guys.
Thank you.